My name is Alex, and I am 34 years old. When I look back at the shape of my life, it often feels like two different worlds stacked together, never truly touching. On one side, there is the life I built on my own. Long nights coding in rented apartments, the slow climb from a shaky startup to selling a logistics platform for one fay tam trum trial do la. On the other side, there is my family rooted in small town traditions, blind loyalty to the firstborn, and a stubborn refusal to see me for anything beyond the quiet child in the corner. The message came on a Thursday afternoon when the air outside my office window in New York still carried a faint chill of spring. I was reviewing a contract with an investment group when my phone lit up. 6 words. Just Jordan's family this year. Keeping it small. That was it. No greeting, no signature, no explanation. A text from my mother, and yet it landed like a slap across my chest. I sat back in my chair, the skyline of Manhattan rising beyond the glass, and for a moment I forgot how to breathe. Jordan, my older sibling by 3 years, had always been the golden child. He stayed in Indiana, married his high school sweetheart, and took over our father's modest hardware business. The town paper ran photos of him holding Little League trophies, cutting the ribbon at the shop's anniversary sale, or standing proudly with his 3 children in matching sweaters at the holiday parade. Meanwhile, I had spent the last decade building something from the ground up. No loans from family, no safety nets. I started with a laptop that barely turned on, teaching myself how to streamline supply chains for small clinics. Eventually, my company served hospitals across the country. When I sold it, the deal made headlines in trade journals. One fay tom trum trio dola numbers my parents never once mentioned aloud. I stared at that text again, keeping it small. Translation, keeping it about Jordan. They didn't want me there, not really. Even after everything I had achieved, I was still the extra chair at the table, the cousin no one bragged about. For a while, I just sat in silence. I thought of birthdays forgotten. I thought of the Christmas card where everyone in the photo wore red sweaters, except me because they had taken the picture when I was away at college and no one bothered to wait. I thought of my father raising his glass once at Thanksgiving, saying, "Here's to real success, family, and hard work just like Jordan shows us." The words had stung then. They still stung now. I typed one word back. Enjoy. That was all. I did not ask why, I did not beg for a seat. I refused to play the role of the unwanted guest. But inside, something shifted. See, I had just closed on a property up in Vermont, a 30-acre spread with a glass front lodge, a private dock, and views of the lake that could silence a restless mind. I had planned to surprise the family someday, maybe invite them for a holiday retreat. Now, staring at that cold little text, I decided no more surprises. If they thought I was small enough to forget, I would show them how wrong they were. But what they did not know was this humiliation has a long memory. Every slight, every shrug, every time my voice was drowned out by Jordan's stories at the dinner table, I carried them all. That text was not new. It was just louder. So I leaned back, phone in hand, watching barges crawl down the Hudson River below, and felt the same ache I had carried since childhood. The ache of being invisible in your own family. And in that moment, I made a quiet vow. I would not chase their approval anymore. Instead, I would write my own story one chapter at a time. And this being cut out of a family gathering with 6 careless words would become the spark for something far greater than they ever expected. If you have ever been treated like the invisible one in your own family, share your story in the comments so I know I am not alone. When people ask me about my childhood, I usually smile and say it was ordinary. That word ordinary keeps the conversation polite. It spares me from telling strangers about the long ache of being overlooked. But if I am honest, my childhood was not ordinary at all. It was a study in contrast, one child held high in the light, the other left, standing in the shadows. Jordan was 3 years older than me, and from the beginning he seemed destined to be the family's shining emblem. He was broad-shouldered by the time he turned 14, with a natural grin that charmed teachers and coaches alike. When he threw a football, the local papers noticed. When he made the playoffs as quarterback in high school, the diner downtown gave him free pie every Friday. People slapped him on the back as if he had single-handedly put our small Indiana town on the map. And me, I was the quiet one in the garage. I liked puzzles, wires, the hum of an old circuit board. At 12, I took apart a discarded desktop from Goodwill and got it running again with scraps pulled from junk bins. I still remember walking into the kitchen, grease on my hands, saying, "Mom, I got 2 computers talking to each other." She barely looked up from her magazine. "That's nice. Did you hear Jordan might get scouted this year?" It was always like that. Every time I tried to share something, the spotlight swung back to Jordan. At family dinners, I would start talking about my classes, how I had won a state science fair, or how I was building a small radio. Within seconds, my mother would interrupt. Jordan is thinking of expanding the shop with Dad. Isn't that wonderful? And everyone would nod, forks clinking as if my words had never left my mouth. I learned early to swallow disappointment. At birthdays, my cake was an afterthought, often baked from a mix, while Jordan's parties filled the yard with balloons and neighbors. By the time I turned 22, they even forgot the day altogether. When I called home, my mother gasped, "Oh no, was that today? We'll make it up to you." The promise never came. A few weeks later, a Christmas card arrived, instead a glossy photo of Jordan's family in matching sweaters. I kept it not out of sentiment, but as proof of how easily I could be erased. My father was no better. When I earned a full scholarship to Georgia Tech, he shook his head. That's far away. Why not stay close? Help Jordan with the shop. To him, my ambitions were less important than being another pair of hands in the family business. It was the first time I realized he did not really see me at all. Those small cuts added up. By the time I was in my mid-20s, they had carved a deep truth into me. I was the other child, the one no one bragged about. I had dinners alone at the kids' table while Jordan carved the turkey, and Dad praised the shop's bright future. I was standing in the garage soldering wires while Jordan's name echoed in the stadium. Yet even then I kept coming home. Every holiday, every gathering I showed up, with gifts, with stories, with hope that maybe this time they would notice. And every time I left with that same quiet ache, the weight of invisibility pressing deeper into my chest. Humiliation teaches you things. It teaches you patience because you wait for the smallest scrap of acknowledgement. It teaches you silence because you learn your words will be interrupted anyway. But it also teaches you something else, something more dangerous. It teaches you how to remember. And I remembered everything. Those memories would become fuel and in time fire. But I will tell you that part later. By the time I hit my early 30s, I had money most people in my family could hardly imagine. I did not come from wealth. I built it brick by brick, late night by late night, fueled by a mix of stubbornness and the hunger to prove myself. Selling my company had left me with one fey, tum trum trio dola, in the bank. I had savings spread across investments, a penthouse in Manhattan, and more security than I had ever dared to dream. Yet money did not erase that old ache. You can have millions and still feel like the 12-year-old left at the kids' table. That is the strange cruelty of family neglect. It seeps into your bones, and no matter how high you climb, it whispers that you are still small. So when my mother's text arrived, telling me the family would gather only for Jordan's side this year, something in me hardened. I would not beg. I would not ask for a seat at their table. Instead, I would build my own. A few months before, I had purchased a property in Vermont tucked between rolling hills and a lake, so still, it looked like glass at dawn. 30 acres in total. The centerpiece was a custom-built lodge with floor-to-ceiling windows, a wraparound porch, and a fireplace large enough to swallow whole logs. The estate had its own dock, a boathouse, and a stocked trout lake. The price? $15 million, paid in cash. I had not told my family. My idea was to invite them one holiday, reveal the home as if it were a gift for all of us, a retreat where memories could finally be made. But after that text, my vision shifted. This would no longer be about togetherness. It would be about making a statement. What they did not know was that I had already been preparing. My penthouse in New York was elegant, but it was never truly safe from them. One Christmas, I discovered my mother had made a copy of my keys. She used it to let herself in while I was traveling. I came home to find Jordan and his family lounging in my living room. My fridge rated my wine half gone. When I asked how they had entered, my mother smiled like it was nothing. Family shares Alex. Your home is our home. I did not shout. I did not throw them out. I simply changed the locks, canceled the spare keys, and made a quiet note never again. That memory burned as I walked the grounds of the Vermont estate. No one would copy these keys. This was mine. I spent weeks preparing the lodge. Furnishings were ordered in from Italy, rugs hand-woven from Morocco, a dining table carved from a single slab of walnut. The guest rooms were stocked with linens softer than anything my family had ever touched. I had a chef on retainer, a sommelier to curate the cellar, and a landscaping team that made the grounds look like a magazine spread. It was not just wealth, it was proof. Proof that while they celebrated Jordan's hardware store expansion, I was shaping an empire of my own. proof that the quiet child in the garage had grown into someone they could no longer dismiss. My plan was simple. I would host my own gathering on the same weekend they huddled around Jordan's modest banquet hall. And when photos of my estate spread online, when whispers rippled through extended relatives and neighbors, the contrast would be unavoidable. They would see how small I was not. But revenge, I learned, is sweetest when it unfolds slowly, almost gently, like a curtain rising on a stage. I did not want a single grand gesture. I wanted a series of moments, each one sharper than the last. And the Vermont estate would be the opening act. What they did not know was that the house itself carried one more secret, something even my closest colleagues did not realize. I had set aside a wing of the lodge as a foundation headquarters, complete with offices and conference space. My true weapon was not just money, it was how I planned to use it. I would not only build a legacy, I would build it right in front of them, and I would make sure they could never claim a piece of it. But I am getting ahead of myself. For now, all you need to know is this. While Jordan's family prepared for another small-town celebration, I was setting the stage for something far larger. A reckoning disguised as hospitality, a feast where the menu included humiliation served cold. And I was only just beginning. The day of Jordan's grand celebration arrived, with all the predictable trimmings of small-town pride. They rented out a banquet hall near the courthouse, a building that smelled faintly of varnish and old carpet. Balloons in school colors floated near the ceiling, folding tables groaned with trays of casseroles and pies. For a family that preached humility, they spared no effort when it came to Jordan. I had not been invited, but that did not mean I was absent. Curiosity is a cruel itch, and despite my vow to keep distance, I found myself slipping into the hall midway through the evening. I stood at the back unnoticed for a while, watching the rituals I knew too well. Jordan was there at the center, dressed in a tailored suit his wife likely picked out. His children darted between tables, chasing each other, while relatives clapped and cheered. My father beamed beside him, hand resting on his shoulder, as though Jordan had lifted the whole family into greatness. My mother carried a glass of champagne, her eyes bright with pride. When the speeches began, I considered leaving. But then my father cleared his throat, tapped the microphone, and said words I will never forget. Here's to real success, family, hard work, and the example Jordan sets for us all. The room erupted in applause, and I, standing quietly near the exit, felt the familiar burn in my chest. My name was not mentioned. My achievements, the company I had sold for one Phaeton Trum Trio Dola, the estate in Vermont, none of it mattered. In their eyes, I was still the quiet one, the afterthought. Then Jordan himself stepped forward. He had a knack for timing, for speaking just long enough to sound profound without saying much at all. He raised his glass, scanned the room, and then his eyes found me in the back. A smirk curved his lips. Success isn't about money, he said, loudly enough for the crowd to hush. It's about family. Some of us will never understand that. Laughter rippled through the hall. A few relatives turned to look at me, their faces flickering with pity, amusement, or both. Jordan's words had been meant as a knife, and he knew exactly where to twist it. I stayed still, my hands in my pockets. If humiliation were a currency, my family had been spending it on me for decades. Tonight was simply another withdrawal. But what they did not know was that I had already begun my response. That morning, I had scheduled an email blast to the extended family, cousins, aunts, even the neighbors who lived 3 streets over. Attached was a glossy set of photos, my Vermont lodge at sunset, the lake reflecting pink skies, the dining table set for 30 guests. The caption read simply, "Since I'm not invited, I'll be celebrating at my own place. Hope your motel rooms are cozy." By the time Jordan lifted his glass, half the room had already received the message. I saw phones, buzzing screens lighting up, whispers spreading like wildfire. A cousin leaned over to show his wife the images. Her eyes widened before darting toward me. For the first time in years, I did not feel small. I felt dangerous. But still, humiliation has a way of clinging. Jordan's smirk, my father's toast, my mother's proud smile, they seared into me. I left the hall quietly, without a word, stepping back into the cool night. Behind me, the laughter carried on, muffled by the doors, but I was no longer listening. Walking to my car, I thought about how revenge rarely needs noise. Sometimes it is a slow burn, the kind that catches only when the air is just right. And that night, with their phones filled with images of the estate, they had never been invited to the first spark had landed. Still, this was only the beginning. When I drove away from that banquet hall, headlights slicing through the Indiana dark, I did not feel sadness. I felt clarity. All those years of waiting for a scrap of recognition had ended the moment Jordan smirked at me with the whole family laughing behind him. My role as the overlooked sibling was finished. I was writing a new role, one they would never forget. The Vermont Lodge became my war room. By Monday morning, I was back in New York, and by Tuesday, I had a small team of staff at the estate, a private chef, an event planner, and 2 assistants who specialized in digital campaigns. I told them I wanted a celebration that would outshine any family gathering I had ever been excluded from. No budget limit. Their eyes widened when I said it, but I meant every word. The plan was not only to host my own event, but to weave it into the public eye. I wanted my family to see my wealth not as rumor, but as headline. The first move had already gone viral on a smaller scale. The email with the photos of my estate had circulated far beyond cousins and neighbors. Screenshots ended up on community Facebook groups where people commented about the scale of the property and speculated about my fortune. Is that really Alex's place? Didn't he sell some company? By Wednesday, a local business magazine requested an interview. I said yes. But the sharper blade was yet to come. On Thursday morning, I drafted a document and slipped it into an envelope marked Family Trust, Urgent. Inside was a fabricated clause from a fictional attorney, a note suggesting that my late grandfather's estate had been mismanaged, and that I, not Jordan, was the rightful inheritor of several parcels of land. I did not send it to a court. I sent it to the family group chat. My aunt gasped so loudly she called me within the hour. Jordan stormed my inbox with half-coherent threats. My mother sent a long message pleading for calm. Of course it was all smoke, a staged provocation. But it forced them to imagine a world where the balance of power was no longer in Jordan's favor. I let the tension hang for 2 days before sending a second message. Relax. Just a draft I was playing with. See you at graduation weekend. The damage had already been done. Meanwhile, I worked on the real reveal. I arranged for a professional photographer to capture the Vermont estate at its finest candles lit in the dining hall. Champagne flutes lined like soldiers, the dock strung with lights that shimmered on the water. I scheduled those images to post on my social media precisely when Jordan's graduation banquet was set to begin. A single caption would accompany them, celebrating milestones in my own way. But I also had something larger in mind. I had been sitting on an idea for months, one born out of both anger and vision. A scholarship fund in the names of my grandparents who had been the only ones in the family to ever treat me with warmth. I earmarked $5 million for the launch with one condition written into the charter: no direct relatives of mine could apply. The fund would open nationwide. I drafted the press release myself, careful with each phrase. Dedicated to students who feel unseen, unheard, and underestimated by those meant to support them. That line was for me as much as for anyone else. The release was scheduled for the same afternoon as the banquet. All the while, I kept my silence. I did not respond to Jordan's calls, did not answer my mother's texts. When my father sent a brief message, "We should talk like men," I left it unread. They had given me silence for years, now I returned it in kind. The closer the weekend drew, the calmer I felt. Revenge, I realized, was not about rage, it was about orchestration. It was about building a stage so grand that when the curtain lifted, there was no way for the audience to look away. And what they did not know was that I had one final card to play something that would make the entire family understand just how invisible I no longer was. But that revelation, like all the best acts of revenge, would come only when the timing was perfect. Graduation weekend arrived with the kind of June sunlight that makes small towns look prettier than they are. Banners hung across Main Street, the diner had a Congrats Class of 2020 sign in its window, and the high school parking lot overflowed with families in pressed clothes. Jordan was at the center of it all, beaming as though his child's diploma was the summit of Everest. I did not attend the ceremony. My place was 150 miles away, standing on the deck of my Vermont lodge, watching the lake shimmer under a pale blue sky. I wore no cap, no gown, just a suit tailored in Milan, the kind that feels like a second skin. Around me, staff moved with precision. Candles lined the dock. The chef plated hors d'oeuvres so delicate they looked like art. My event planner checked her clipboard, whispering about timing. At exactly 4 o'clock, while Jordan's banquet was starting in the town hall, I gave the signal. The photographer released the first images online, the lodge glowing in the late afternoon light, champagne flutes catching the sun, a dining table that could seat 30. Within minutes, comments poured in. Is this Alex's place unreal? That's not a house, that's a resort. Screenshots spread through Facebook, Instagram, even LinkedIn. The contrast was sharp, my estate against their folding chairs and casserole trays. But the photos were only the first strike. At 4:30, the press release for the scholarship fund went live. $5 million earmarked for students across the nation dedicated to those who had felt overlooked. Reporters picked up the story almost instantly. The phrasing was deliberate. Inspired by the feeling of invisibility within one's own circle, the fund is designed to give recognition where it has long been denied. By 5 o'clock, my phone was buzzing nonstop. Former classmates messaged congratulations. Colleagues forwarded news clippings. A journalist requested an interview on live radio. Meanwhile, my cousins texted in disbelief. Your name is all over the news. Jordan's face when he saw this wish, you could have seen it. I could imagine it well enough. Him standing at the banquet microphone mid-speech as phones around the hall lit up with headlines about my $5 million gift. My mother clutching her pearls, whispering to my father scowling, muttering about arrogance. The banquet hall, once filled with Jordan's glow, dimming under the weight of my shadow. Still, the final act had not yet come. At 6 o'clock, I drove down the winding road into town, arriving at the banquet hall just as the sun dipped low. I stepped inside unannounced. The room went quiet like a storm cloud rolling in. Jordan froze at the podium, his glass raised mid-toast. My mother's smile cracked. I walked to the front, steady, unhurried. When I reached the microphone, I did not look at my family first. I looked at the crowd, neighbors, teachers, old friends, faces that had known me as the quiet one, the afterthought. I won't take long, I said, my voice even. Today is about graduates stepping into their future, but I wanted to share something that begins today as well. I explained the scholarship, the $5 million dedicated in my grandparents' names. A murmur ran through the crowd. Then I paused, letting silence stretch. There is one condition, I said. This fund is open to every student nationwide, except my direct relatives. Those who never believed in me will not benefit from what I've built. Gasps erupted. A teacher clapped her hand over her mouth. Someone whispered, "Did he just—" My mother turned pale. Jordan's jaw tightened. I stepped back, handed the microphone to the bewildered MC, and left the stage. Behind me, the room buzzed with shock whispers rising into chaos. Outside, the night air was cool, the stars sharp above the small-town streets. I drove away without looking back. For once, I did not feel invisible. I felt like the author of the story, the one who had turned humiliation into spectacle, betrayal into power. And I knew the ripples of what I had done would reach far beyond that banquet hall. The morning after my announcement, I woke in the Vermont Lodge to a silence that felt earned. The lake outside my window was still a mirror holding the early light. On the kitchen counter lay 3 newspapers, each with my name printed bold across the front page. Tech entrepreneur launches $5 million scholarship. A smaller headline noted the peculiar clause that excluded relatives. That detail, of course, had caught the most attention. By noon, my phone was a battlefield. My mother called first, her voice breaking. "Alex, why would you humiliate us like that? People were whispering all night. Do you know what you've done to this family?" I let her finish, then answered plainly. I showed them what you never could, that I was worth noticing. And I hung up. Next came Jordan. His call arrived while I was on the porch, coffee in hand. He did not waste time on greetings. "You think this makes you better than us. You're just a paycheck with legs." Money doesn't make family, Alex. His anger spilled fast, the way it always did when his throne felt shaky. "I never said it did," I told him, keeping my voice steady. "But it does buy freedom. Something you'll never understand as long as you keep clinging to them." There was silence on the line, then a sharp click. He had hung up. But what he did not know was that the world had already started peeling away his facade. By evening, a cousin forwarded me screenshots of an email Jordan had sent months ago and appealed to me for a loan. In it, he confessed his hardware business was bleeding money, that debt collectors were circling, that he needed just $1 million or $2 million to stay afloat. He had signed the note with, "You owe me after all Mom and Dad did for you." The email leaked naturally. Someone in the family chat shared it wider, and soon it was on a Facebook group. The comments were merciless. "So much for the golden boy. Begging your sibling while mocking them, shameful. Jordan's reputation cracked overnight, his once polished image reduced to a meme in our hometown. My father tried his hand at reconciliation. He drove up to Vermont unannounced, pulling into the gravel driveway with his old pickup. When I met him at the porch, he looked older than I. Remembered the lines on his face deep, his shoulders stooped. "We never meant to hurt you," he said, staring at the ground. "Everything we did was for Jordan's future. He was the one who stayed. We thought you didn't need us." The words might have softened me once, but not now. I studied him, the man who had toasted to real success while ignoring his other child. "I needed respect," I replied. "That's all I ever asked for, and you couldn't give it." He did not argue. He just nodded a small, defeated gesture and left without another word. The calls, the messages, the leaks, they all blurred together over the next week. Relatives split into camps, some applauding me, others condemning me. The scholarship applications poured in faster than my foundation could process them. Reporters kept calling, eager for another quote. And through it all, I felt something I had never felt before. Peace. Not the fragile peace of keeping quiet at family dinners, but the solid peace of finally drawing a line and holding it. For once, the burden of invisibility was not mine. It was theirs. The lodge was quiet again. The guests had gone. The photographers packed up their lenses, and the only sound was the lake brushing gently against the dock. I sat in the great room with a single lamp, burning a glass of bourbon in my hand, and thought about how quickly things can change. The headlines would fade, the gossip would shift to something else, but one thing had changed for good: my place in the story of my family. No longer the invisible one, no longer the afterthought. I had drawn a boundary so sharp it could not be ignored. Yet some things stayed the same. I still woke early, brewed my own coffee, and worked late into the night on projects that mattered to me. I still kept my records in neat blue folders, every contract and deed labeled and filed. Success had not erased those habits. If anything, it made me guard them tighter. We kept one rule: I would not beg for love that should have been freely given. The paper did the rest, the charter of the scholarship ink on parchment that no relative could twist or claim. I thought of the people who had helped quietly along the way, the clerk who rushed my filings, the lawyer who proofread the foundation documents without fuss, the assistant who stayed up past midnight formatting applications. None of them were family by blood, but all of them had offered more respect than my own kin ever had. Boundaries save time, records cut noise, calm wins. Those were the truths I carried out of this fire. Sometimes revenge is loud, but sometimes it is just a quiet refusal to be erased. I did not gloat, I did not shout. I simply placed my story in the open, let the light hit it, and walked away. So now I leave you with a question: what would you have done first? Called, filed, or walked away? Tell me below, tap subscribe, and come back this weekend. Details changed. This is not legal advice. We'll keep it clean.